Javi thanks for coming to this video. We hope you enjoy it, and we want to hear from you. So leave comments, like the video, send us an email, whatever, share it with your friends. Ciao amici, welcome to LinguCast. We have another interview for you today. We are talking with Dr. Troy Cox, a professor here at BYU. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. Cox is amazing. His focus is on language proficiency. So we're going to talk about that today. Dr. Cox.
So where do you want me to?
So give an introduction about you.
Okay, so my name is Troy Cox. I've been at BYU for 28 years.
Amazing.
First 17 years, I was at the English Language Center, so where I helped students that were coming to learn English to acquire those skills. And then while I was working at the ELC, I did my PhD in instructional psychology and technology. We're sort of a focus on educational psychology. But in particular, I did a focus on language assessment, how to assess language.
Very cool.
So typically what I tell students and my colleagues is that what I do is testing mostly my colleagues' patience. Or my students' patience, depending on who my audience is. And then back in 2013, I started working at this. So I got a joint appointment. I became the associate director at the Center for Language Studies, where I help with the proficiency testing that occurs for students in all of the language programs. So at the ELC, I worked with students from all over the world learning English. Now I work with English speakers trying to learn foreign language.
Interesting.
So sort of the change that way.
Oh.
And I also so I have a joint appointment between the Center for Language Studies and the Linguistics department. And so we do work in the Linguistics department with the TESOL students. So students are going on to teach English as a second language.
Okay, very cool. I'm curious now about kind of your experience between the English Learning Center, is that right?
English Language Center.
Thank you. English Language Center and the Center for Language Studies with kind of those two demographics. Have you noticed kind of a difference in working with students, whether they're learning English or whether they're learning other languages?
Well, I would say that the motivation, I think in general, students know that throughout the world, people will know that if they learn English, they'll have much more economic opportunities.
True.
So there's huge incentive to learn another language.
Yeah.
For English speakers to learn other languages, oftentimes you have to, the benefits don't seem, it's more like there are educational benefits. It's good for the mind, but oftentimes it takes a little more convincing.
Yeah.
So I
Interesting.
think that's probably one of the biggest things. So for our foreign language classes, trying to get enough students to enroll in a class so that we can carry it,
Yeah.
especially for what we call our lictals, less commonly taught languages. So like if we want a lictal class to carry, traditionally most classes require like 15 students to carry.
Yeah.
We do it so that if there are at least 5 students, if we can get at least 5, we'll subsidize so that the course can carry, so that students can learn
Cool.
to the language. But that means that you have to feel like we have to have 5 students that are interested in the language.
Right.
And that means that then we have to find an instructor who's qualified to teach that language.
Yeah.
And so and a lot of these instructors, it's as much an act of love as it is a way to get paid, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Because BYU does offer, I feel like BYU, I'm not super informed about this, but BYU offers languages that maybe like very few other universities in the US offer.
We offer the most languages in the United States. So really, BYU offers 83 languages.
83 language.
So yeah, fascinating. Yeah. There are 10 major languages.
Mm-hmm.
And so Spanish, Portuguese, French and Italian, German and Russian, those are each their own department. And then Asian Near Eastern languages, we have Japanese, Korean, Chinese, and Arabic. So those are our 10 major languages. Then we offer minors in about 10 other languages, and then we start doing language certificates and other things. So our goal is to try to make sure that we offer an advanced language class for any language that a person would learn on their mission.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Interesting. And for the first question, so you worked with linguistics before.
Yeah.
And what, in your definition, what's linguistics?
Oh, I would say it's the scientific study of language.
Solid.
I mean, if it feels maybe it seems really basic, but it's I would say one of the misconceptions is linguistics is not the same as being a polyglot. It doesn't mean speaking lots of languages. It means studying how language works.
Yeah. It's a good distinction. And how did you I mean, you gave us a little bit of your background, but how did you develop a love for languages, and how did you want to get into this field?
Great question. So when I was in high school, I had a really outstanding language teacher. I took French from him my sophomore year, and then he taught Russian as well. So then I took French and Russian my junior and my senior years.
Oh.
And when I came to BYU and I was going to study French and Russian, go into international business. I couldn't take the Russian class didn't work with my schedule. I took the French class, and then I discovered there was this class called Linguistics, where you didn't just have to choose one language, you could learn about all the languages. And so that's what I did. So I took Linguistics 230, I believe is what it was at the time, sort of the intro to linguistics course.
Uh-huh.
Then I got my mission call to Italy.
Cool.
While I was in Italy, this will let you know how old I am. This was during Perestroika and Glasnost. So a lot of Russian immigrants left Russia to Germany to Italy. So I interacted with a lot of Russians when I was in Italy.
Cool.
And then met a family that was Chinese there. And so when I came back to BYU, I went into linguistics. I studied Chinese for 4 semesters.
Oh my gosh.
And uh, and then I realized, I speak English pretty well. Maybe I should go into teaching English instead of trying to learn another language.
Uh-huh.
Because I think one of the things that I became aware of is that to truly be fluent and speak another language, it takes a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
You can dabble around a lot of, and you can sort of, and people are like, how many languages do you speak? Well, I'm a language testing guy. I feel good if I can speak English with the wind behind my back. And some people are like, oh, he speaks 12 languages. I'm like, you might know how to say hi
Right.
in 12 languages. You might be able to count in 12 languages.
Right.
But when it comes to actual speaking a language, it's a little bit different.
Absolutely.
And which brings me to the next question. Good, you mentioned that. What do you when you see courses promising like, hey, speak like a native speaker? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of promises like, hey, speak like a native speaker?
Yeah. So this is native speaker is really problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at least the field in the scientific field, we sort of have gotten away from it because what does that mean? Does it mean sound like one?
Sound like one.
Does it mean um so like what so I will tell you in the field we've gotten away from saying native speaker at all. We call it like we call it what's your first language?
Okay.
Your L1 versus your L2. Like native speaker has a lot of baggage. Probably more baggage is non-native speaker because it sort of makes it sound like there's some deficiency. So I would say, could I answer a different question? Can I say, what does it mean to be a proficient speaker?
That's a better because you can be a native and still be bad at the language.
Yeah. So like, what is it? So let's take neurodivergent individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Is someone who's autistic, are they a native speaker of their what? If they're nonverbal,
Mm.
Mm.
Interesting.
right? So like, that's where it just sort of gets a little bit sticky.
Yeah.
And so, what does it mean to be a native speaker? So, um, you're from Brazil. So, does the does a professor at a Brazilian in a Brazilian university use the same Portuguese as someone that is a manual laborer?
Definitely not.
Right. So
I
which is the native speaker?
Well, both are native speakers, but both have, let's say, a lexicon and a variant that differs from one another, and their variants are culturally appropriate for their specific environments, which tells a lot about them, about what they think, and about their ideas, and about what they are interested in.
So I'm from Southern Idaho. Like I was born in Blackfoot, Idaho. I was born in Southern Idaho, and um, and so I have relatives that like my grandpa was a sheep farmer, right? And so I have some relatives that are that are laborers, and it's not it would blue collar workers, and it would like and they might say like guess who I seen down at the store, right?
Sure.
Non-standard English,
Mhm.
non-standard. Then you have university professor me, right? Who I can actually speak sometimes with the wind behind my back. I can speak somewhat academic English, right? But one of the things that happens is if you try to speak that higher level of language among some people, I think, do you think you're better than we are? Are you getting too good for your roots? Like there's all the sociolinguistic stuff. So a lot of it is, are you code switching? Are you able to move up and down? And so that's why I don't like the term native speaker. I'm like, especially when it comes to me as a testing person, I'm like, well, what are the functions we're trying to perform with the language? What's the situation?
Right.
Am I testing language for an academic context for to say that people are university ready, or am I testing it so that they can survive, like buying groceries?
Sure.
So that's one of the things that I ask. I don't know, like, so your question is, what do I call a native speaker? I think it's very problematic.
Oh yeah, definitely. In what particular areas? No, actually, what makes proficiency testing a reliable indicator of language ability in that sense? Because you said that you need to calculate all that. How does one, for example, I took the OPI in Arabic,
Yeah.
right? How was the tester able to tell? Okay, he's at this level here. How does one indicate?
Well, so the way what we do with proficiency testing is what we, for oral proficiency testing, since that's the test that you talked
Yeah.
about, we try to mimic it so it reflects real world communicative situations that are spontaneous. Okay, so one of the things that when we define proficiency is what would be appropriate for speakers um, for spontaneous speech
Mm.
Mm,
in a way that's meaningful for the people that they're interacting. Okay. So like what we're trying to do is we're trying to think of what's a spontaneous interaction that might occur where you'd have this, these linguistic functions. Okay. And by spontaneous as opposed to, and then what we do is that with proficiency skills, at least with the ACTFL and ILR. So ACTFL is the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages. ILR is the Interagency Language Roundtable. The ILR scales were developed first. ACTFL was derived from that. Okay. And what they do is they have like distinct levels. And what you want to do is you see what can someone consistently do at one level and where is their systematic breakdown at the next level.
Okay.
So you only score between two levels. You look to see where is there a pattern of strengths that they can do everything at the one level, and where is there a pattern of breakdown at the next level. And what happens is we move up, we take different criteria that expands exponentially. So for instance, we have text type. So like the lowest level is going to be words and phrases and memorized chunks of speech. Then the next text type is going to be sentences and strings of sentences. The next text type is the oral paragraph. The next text type is extended discourse, extended cogent discourse.
Okay.
Then we take the thing from content, talk about yourself, to self and daily life, to the world and community at large, to the abstraction, the world of ideas. Then we take what are the functions like, and so we look at what we do is we say the function is going to be memorized phrases, formulaic utterances would be at the lowest level to transactional,
Mhm.
asking and answering questions. to the next one is going to be narration and description in all major time frames. Talk about the past, the present, and the future. Next one is going to be supported opinion, discussing abstract topics, hypothetical situation.
Mm.
Hypothesis in conjecture, like competing realities.
Right.
So when you take all those different things, you look to say, well, what can they consistently do at the one level, and where's their breakdown? The breakdown might be content. They're not able to, their vocabulary is too generic. It might be an inability to maintain consistent tenses.
Right.
And so that would be breakdown. It may be uh, like at the very beginning parts of learning a language, it may be the inability to create sentences.
Sure.
You're giving a list of words, and by a list of words, I mean you're saying noun, verb that hasn't been conjugated.
Right.
Like, so you say, like you'd be using the infinitives. Like you'd be saying, yo caminar,
Mm.
like I to walk. Like you're not doing anything to modify the words to create sentences. That could be patterned breakdown at that one level. So what you do is you look to see where are their strengths at the one level, where's their breakdown at the next higher level, and then you assign a rating based on that. So that's sort of how we do the testing.
And a curious question. You mentioned that you mentioned the actful.
Yeah.
And a lot of viewers, a lot of people are more familiar with the cipher, which is the European scale.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between the actful and the cipher? Which one's better? What are the pros and cons of one and the other?
Well, so yes. So the Sefer was developed after the Actful. And what the Sefer was designed to be more for curriculum.
Mm.
Like how can we teach people language? It was not designed for how do we test people.
Oh.
Now, what happened is that the Sefer was designed, it has A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, right? The scales can talk to each other. Actful can map onto Sefer, but Sefer cannot map onto Act.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
how come?
Because the Sefer scale, it does not constrain the function that the language what the person's supposed to be able to do with language. Yeah. So if you look at the Sefer scale, they have about, I'm thinking like 40 different charts.
Oh,
So like they have listening. So they have listening, and then they have listening in a speaking context. They have listening to a radio program. They have listening, overhearing a conversation.
wow.
They have listening, so they have all these different types of listenings
Interesting.
that are listed. But when they've created a test, they don't actually specify which listening was being done where
Okay.
they're awarding the rating.
Huh.
Does that make so that
Yeah.
and um Actful and has been fairly proprietary that you can't award an Actful rating unless you're a licensed Actful tester. Yeah. Whereas anyone can take a Cepher rating and just say, this is what my test means, this is what my score means, but there's no quality control.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because ACTFL is an actual organization, and a cipher is, as far as I know, something governmental.
It's from the Council of Europe. You're the ones that came
Yeah.
up with it, I think.
You have different institutes like Goethe gives us the cipher score for German. The DALF gives the one for French, and they all have their own.
Yeah, and like Cambridge does it for ESL, so they have that each institution in each country sort of defines how they're going to operationalize it.
Hmm.
And my colleague was at a conference once, and one of the education ministers there, and said, my B2 will never be your B2.
Oh.
Because like in how they're interpreting it. Because yeah, in Europe, you've got different levels. Like the northern countries tend to northern countries, they tend to, like the Scandinavian countries or whatever, typically have people that are fairly proficient in English. Like it's,
Yeah.
But then you get to other parts of Europe and English may not be as strong, but they can still have the same B2 rating. Yet each
Interesting.
country is sort of interpreting it their own.
Yeah, I actually have an experience in that in my mission with a companion of mine that that his companion the one of the companionships one of the my companion's companion took a test and got B2,
Mhm.
and he compared his companion, of course, is German, with his, and it was like okay, and then we met a guy. He's like, yeah, I'm B2, and my companion was like, he looked at him weird, like, you are B2. And then we I remember that, us going in the bus back home, he was, like, perplexed, like, "What's going on?" I was like, this man said he was B2." I was with the other elder when he took their test. My German is about the same as the other elder. If his German is B2, mine's probably around B2, the same level, and this guy, he this my German is light years way better than his, and he's saying that he's B2.
Interesting.
So you can have multiple definition of B2. It's kinda like a joke how, like, A1's like this, A2 is like this, B1's like this, and then B2 is like this.
I mean, and that's what makes it really hard. So, like, I'm actually working with a colleague at Language Testing International. They're the licensee that does actual tests about looking at the suffer descriptors and trying to make sure that they can communicate with each other. But my friend Rachel, she works at FBI. She said, there doesn't need to be one universal scale. Different scales can serve different purposes. She said, she's like, and she actually gave a really interesting analogy that I liked. She said, every time when there's a different Bible translation, it costs about $1 million to have a different translation of a Bible,
Really?
right? So she's like, so you need to ask yourself, why, what value is there in the different translation? Well, oftentimes it's because there are different purposes behind it, right?
Right.
There's different purposes behind it, and there can be utility among them,
Sure.
but you need to understand. So when Rachel, like when I was talking with her, one of the things that they use is that when they're so let's take Arabic since you
Arabic.
use
Yeah.
so testing Arabic for diplomats.
Arabic is an interesting one, yeah.
Yeah. Arabic for diplomats, near in that environment, nearly everyone in the educated thing will also be fluent in MSA, Modern Standard Arabic.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can sort of rely on this sort of educated thing because there's a context where you would use it. It's going to be
Right.
diplomatic context. But one of the things that is primarily assumed is that when you're talking with people, they want to showcase their language. Well, imagine that you're interrogating someone that's a suspected terrorist. Are they going to want to, how much are they going to, there's the assumption that you're speaking with a cooperative interlocutor.
Right.
That maxim doesn't always hold true in a testing situation and in a real world situation
Yeah.
when you start moving into a government context. You could have someone that doesn't want to speak, and then let's say that they speak Levantine or Egyptian Arabic, and so if you're trying to test Arabic, what's the Arabic that you're trying to test?
Exactly. That was actually one of my questions is because for example, I know Shami Arabic, and due to my influence serving Germany, I met many Syrians, but due to my influence consuming Arabic media from other countries, I have Jordanian influence, a little bit of Egyptian influence, and with my modern standard Arabic, I got advanced low,
Yeah.
which is a pretty decent score, but say a bit slow. But the thing is, I'm thinking, well, uh, I was talking, I was watching this talk show with a friend of mine, and he said this guy, he's actually mixing all his dialect with uh with MSA. If you did that on the OPI, you would have gotten destroyed. You would have gotten a low score on that. So like, would that be a thing? Because like you try to how they try to separate it? Because a lot of Arabs themselves they struggle separating both of them
Mm.
sometimes.
What I like to say is that as we start moving up the proficiency scale, it moves to a matter of agency.
Hmm. An agency.
Meaning that you can choose the language that you're using for the person that you're speaking with. You can do it for a different purpose. Yeah. So, for instance, I could tell you a story about what happened in the past. And I'm like, okay, I want to make it real. So I'm going to use the historic present.
Mm.
And I might say, um, so I'm going to the yoga studio. And when I get there, my card doesn't work. And I'm using the present tense, but I'm telling you because I want to be more vivid, like you're seeing it. Or I could make it be more passive. It's like, well, when I went to the studio yesterday, I saw that this happened. Now there's the marked form, the unmarked form. The unmarked is sort of what's standard, but you can use the marked form for evoking different emotions or giving the audience. The language learner isn't aware of all the different options. And so oftentimes they're doing it sort of haphazardly and you're not certain. So if someone's speaking Arabic, is it because they don't know it and they're only going with the forms that they have? Or is it because uh, or is it because they're deliberately choosing to do it? Right. That's one of the reasons why we have gotten away from saying native and non-native, especially with the proficiency scale. We spend most of our world in the intermediate and advanced, where we're taking care of like transactional things. We're telling stories about what happened. But when I was actively testing for OPIs in English for native English speakers,
Mm.
um, about a third of them were not superior in their L1.
So, are we talking about like native speakers who are educated, college educated, or
Yeah, they're getting certified for dual language immersion or for bilingual education. So they had to do a test in Spanish and a test in English. And what would happen? Here's the thing: is for superior, you need to be able to speak about issues.
Right.
It would often just keep it back to the autobiographical. They would talk about the issue.
Interesting.
They wouldn't move beyond the autobiographical. And it could be that they were unfamiliar with what the function they were supposed to do was the function being able to talk about issues at the abstract level with it using extended cogent discourse.
Mm.
but then again, how does one? So the tester assumed that okay, they can't do it, or they simply don't know what they're supposed to do. Because there's a little bit of both.
Yeah, so you can only assess the language that's presented. So if they don't know what to do, perhaps they could do it. And that's why I always say, hey, make sure you study and know what's expected of
Mm.
you. Don't walk in blind.
Right.
Because speaking at the superior level is not something that we do on a daily basis.
Right.
And so you need to make sure that you understand what the expectations are. And you can only rate the language that's been presented. So if they don't do it, then that's going to be considered systematic breakdown at the superior level, which means that they're going to be an advanced high or an advanced mid, depending on the level to the extent to which we're doing.
So I took the TOEFL
Yeah.
twice.
Can you explain me?
The TOEFL is a test for non-native English speakers to getting to university. So the university accepts you or rejects you based on the score and and they don't care about how good you speak English. They care how good you are at an academic setting.
Mm.
So it's always academic focus. So they're listening lectures, the speakings is talking about issues with
Yeah.
so focus on that.
Right.
And and I noticed that with happens to me, I have a stutter.
Yeah.
And I stutter in Portuguese too. Does it affect the would this affect the tester's perception of my language proficiency?
Mm.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not because well, first of all, we're looking at to see how well you meet the functions. And so if you're meeting the function of telling of doing a past narration or a future or a future narration or description of something, um, speech impediments are not what we're looking for. We're looking for like the text type, the lexical density, vocabulary. Like one of the things that we've noticed that seems to be a pretty strong indicator of a person's proficiency is the like the number of transition words they use, the number and variety.
Okay.
So like if you can only say but
Right.
versus if you can say and in addition, nevertheless, heretofore, notwithstanding,
Right.
like as you start showing uh differentiation of these different types of transitions using causality, using temporal
Yeah.
relationships, that seems to be a really key indicator of moving along from the intermediate, which is transactional, to more to the advanced and the superior.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the your average speaker doesn't talk like that everyday speech.
But if
If you
you knew what the like desired function was, if you knew that you were trying to speak in the and way, then you would
Adapt to and most native speakers of the language, it's easy to get to the advanced. That's not the real issue. The issue is moving from the advanced to the superior.
sure. So I wonder, you kind of alluded or you mentioned earlier that well, kind of this idea that being aware of what's expected of you going into the test. I'm thinking about, from my own experience and others, for a lot of language students, testing is something that causes anxiety.
exactly.
We worry a lot about it, but I can see how it's a tool. It's an aid for you to try to understand where you are and where you want to get. So how do you kind of approach among students like talking about language testing in a way that isn't anxiety inducing but actually shows them that it's there to help them?
So so for official testing, we do so at the CLS, at the Center for Language Studies, every semester I do a little thing where I sort of go over so students that have to take a test have an opportunity to ask questions, and I'll go through the levels of the test. And I actually have a few videos for the people can use for test prep. And if you actually open up, there are handbooks that sort of talk about
Mm,
general test taking principles. Okay,
uh-huh.
so that way, at least if it's a test that if there's any high stakes at all for the test,
Uh-huh.
it would behoove the student to at least be familiar with what the format is.
Yes.
So, that being said, a lot of the stuff is to just sort of there's no way that you're gonna be able to memorize everything for a language test the day before.
Sure.
So it would be a lot better to get a good night's sleep, um, be well rested, to eat,
Yeah.
and come in, being present. The one thing that I do tell people is that since we are in a English dominant environment,
Mm,
immerse yourself beforehand with the language so that you can sort of, um, so that you're a little more prepared to speak.
right.
And how long should this immersion last?
To say even well, it'd be even just an hour beforehand, right?
Mm,
A day or two would be great, but like we have life and stuff. But I think an analogy I like to give is so my adult children have moved out of the house. And now that they're out of the house, it's easy to just sort of stack stuff into their rooms. Oh, where do we put this? Let's just put this on the floor here, right here. Yeah, and it's a little cluttered.
mhm.
Well, it's hard to use it when there's stuff on the floor. And so when you're actively using it, then you sort of put it out of the way and you make it. So I think that some ways, an analogy I like to use is like when you're um, learning a language, it's like you're building an addition onto your house. It takes a long time to sort of build the addition.
Yeah.
Then if you quit using that wing of the house, it's easy to just sort of let stuff get piled up on it.
Yeah.
And then you're like, "Oh, I need to go into that hard part of the house again." Well, you need to like sort of get the dry moved out of the way, and usually, and then sweep the floors. You sort of take care of that, and then you can use it. So it doesn't take nearly as long
Right.
to use it to like it doesn't take nearly long to like clean it up, but it does take a little bit of time to do it. So you don't want to be doing that when you're taking your test. You want to do that kind of stuff so the automaticity is happening prior to the actual test itself.
Right. I love that analogy.
That's a good analogy. And how do cultural difference play a role in an assessment?
Um,
Like cultural differences, like for example, um, we were talking earlier with another professor saying that like this language doesn't do this. So when you're transferring over, let's say I don't know if there's um, a language proficiency test for languages that are, I would say, they're usually in contexts such as like Quiche or Quechua,
Like indigenous?
indigenous languages, like languages that are more of this style. How does one account proficiency since a lot of times they won't have the lexicon to express ideas that I would say are foreign to them?
So what we do is we focus on the function. So every language should have a way to tell a story, right? Every language should have a way to sort of do a description of things, right? And so what we do is and then every language should have a way to discuss abstract issues.
Mm,
Now, what could happen rhetorically is that perhaps a language doesn't approach it directly. Perhaps they use sort of nuance and symbolism and stuff, right?
yeah.
So for proficiency is how would someone in that cultural expectancy system, what would they need to do in order to express their opinion in a manner that's acceptable?
Hmm.
If it's too direct, if it's sort of like a Western way where we say, here's the main point, here's supporting point one,
Mhm.
supporting point two, supporting point three, it may come across as too direct and may be seen as rude.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So what you need to do is how do they do it in that culture?
Mm.
And that's what you're trying to test at is are they doing it in a way that's culturally appropriate?
So in a way, the test is individualized to each language.
Yeah.
So in like Arabic, for example, they're like, okay, culturally we would have this conversation in MSA because I remember that
Yeah.
when I took the test, I started out in Syrian Arabic, and little by little, when the woman started talking about more complicated issues, I switched to high standard Arabic,
Yeah.
and then and then and then it got to a point where I think that was the point I think she misunderstood me. The and there was a and I and then there was a I think there was a point where she got me I think that was my breaking point when she said like um t- tell a story about you you need you're in a situation like you have a room, but then someone else has the keys,
Mm.
right, to that room. How would you be able to open the door? Or how would uh you need to have a meeting, but then there are people they're coming kind of like in a conflict situation.
Right.
How would you solve this conflict? And then I think that was my breaking point because they're like, okay, how would I do this? And I'm thinking like, crap, I wouldn't even be able to figure out the situation out, even my own native language.
Well, so one of the things for the advanced level is resolving a situation with a complication. So the intermediate is simple transactions. The advanced is situations with a complication. So what they're trying to do is we want we want a description of what happened. So how did you lose your keys? We want the narration. So what happened? Why did you lose your keys? Describe the keys to me. Why can't you find them? And then what suggestions do you have to resolve this? And oftentimes that situation with a complication, it provides an opportunity for people to pull up that more complex grammar where you have to say, what if I were to what if I were to call my friend and they could come, would that be able to resolve the
Mm.
situation? And so it forces them to use grammatical of forms that are not common in simple transactions.
Ah,
And so it allows us to sort of provide a real world situation where we can assess the ability to do another narration, another description, and then see do they have the accuracy to be able to
ah.
function.
I think that's where I screwed up because I told him like, you know what? Never mind. I'll figure out.
But did you say you got an advanced low?
Yeah, I got him as slow.
So that means that you were able to do it minimally.
Right?
Otherwise, it would have been breakdown and you would have gotten an intermediate. So
Because
You're on your
then because the thing is because before that question she had asked the question about what's tell me how it's like she told me like you study criminality you like to study criminality about in teenagers, tell me how um drugs affect teenager capacity and criminality. So I had to talk about that in Arabic.
Which is good. Because the thing is, they need to find patterns of breakdown. So the fact that they were asking about those more complex topics means they're pushing you to the superior to look for patterns of
So
breakdown.
that would be superior. That would be a superior question.
Yeah. So like I overheard this guy. I was down in the language sciences lab. I overheard this guy. Excuse me, he had just finished his OPI, and I heard him on the phone talking with someone. He's like, dude, she started asking me about how the electoral college works and like versus the popular vote. And so I was trying to have to explain how the electoral college worked. And I was thinking to myself, okay, it's obvious that we moved to the superior. Well, you probably, if I were to recreate based on that little thing, my guess is that the interviewer asked, what are people talking about these days? And he said, oh, people are talking about the election. And she was saying, oh, tell me about the election. What are some things that you know? You're like, and then he probably explained it. And then she took that advance, which is being able to talk about current events that are outside the autobiographical,
Right.
and then spiraled up to the superior to start saying, well, what's the issue behind this?
Right.
And because the way that OPI works is that you always take what's of interest to the person, what they mention, and then you see if you can spiral it up. And if there were patterns of breakdown of the advanced, then you wouldn't spiral to the superior. It means that they had been able to maintain the floor of the advanced the whole.
In a question, I got advanced low, but like, would another tester would have like, no, he's definitely advanced middle, advanced high.
So the way that happens, at least for OPIs, is that they're always double rated.
Mm-hmm.
So a recording of a recording of your conversation is made. It's sent to a second rater. They rate it. And if they're in agreement, and let's say that they sent it to a second rater, and the second rater said, this is an advanced mid, then what they would do is then they would send it to a third rater. And the third rater could say, no, this is advanced low. If there's two advanced lows, then the advanced mid is kicked out.
Oh, interesting.
Or it could be sent to a second rater, and they said, this is an intermediate high. Then it would be sent to a third rater, no, this is an advanced low. So wherever there's agreement, that's what the final.
And how does one differ? Like you're in advanced level, right? And according to you, from what you've seen, is the breakdown point of most people. What difference is like advanced low, advanced mid, and advanced high?
Okay, let's switch this as slightly different. Let me talk about an intermediate high, an advanced low, and an advanced mid.
Okay.
Intermediate high means that you can do all of the intermediate without any problem at all, and you're doing the advanced probably around half of the time, but there's systematic breakdown. Advanced low means that you're doing all of the advanced all of the time, but just barely. Advanced mid, you're doing all the advanced level functions really well and clearly, and there's no problem at all, but you're not able to do the superior. Then the advanced high means that you're doing the superior about half the time, but you can't sustain it. So the way that it works is that the high, we like to say the high sublevel is the fallen angel. They're almost at the next level, they just aren't able to sustain it.
Interesting. That's good to know going forward. I'm taking an OPI tomorrow, so this has been very.
Are you? For what language?
For Spanish.
Hey, we're rooting for you.
Well, so maybe to wrap up, because I need to leave in a few minutes. Yeah. What if I just sort of tell you what to expect?
Yeah, sure.
That cool. What you'll do is the first 3 to 5 minutes is going to be a warm up. It'll be like, tell me about yourself. Then, tell me more. And all of the questions are going to be given sort of in a present tense so that you can answer with present tense. So you don't have to do narration or description. One of my favorite questions to ask is, what's a typical day like for you? So you talk about what you
kind of general.
Okay. Then after that 3 to 5 minutes of warm up, then they'll start with, the purpose of the warm up is 1, to help you feel comfortable. 2, to help you get back into your Spanish mind.
Right.
And you get the cotton out of your mouth, like sweep the stuff out. So they're not actually evaluating anything yet. Yeah. And then probably the most important. So psychologically, it's to make you feel comfortable. Linguistically, it's to sort of help you get used to speaking the language.
Yeah.
And on the assessment, it's to get a bank of topics that they can ask you about. So
Okay.
a bank of things that you've expressed interest in, so that I know that I can talk about any one of these questions, and so it could be that Oh, I found out that you're from Virginia. All right, that's a good question that I could ask. Oh, I found out that, you know,
Right, you study languages.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I get those lists of things. Then they'll do what's called a level check.
Okay.
So let's say that I feel like you can. Okay, so let me tell you about the warm up. If you were to spawn and say, "My name is Sophie. I'm from Virginia. I'm at BYU." Notice those are all sentences,
Yeah.
and you could reorder the sentences fairly easily without any. That's a string of sentences. That's an intermediate response.
Uh-huh.
Whereas if you were to say, "Oh, I don't know where to begin. Let's see. Well, my name's Sophie, but actually my name was Sophia, but all my friends call me Sophie, and they gave me that nickname when I was 5 years old because of." Anyway, do you see like that? Yeah, is going to be more indicative that you're probably at the advanced level because you're doing a narration and a description while you're doing the work.
Interesting.
And that would let them know, oh, I'm getting some evidence. I think I'm going to start at the advanced.
Uh-huh.
But if you're only giving short responses, they're probably going to start at the intermediate to prove that you can do the intermediate. And so your test will be more efficient if you volunteer.
Okay, interesting.
Okay.
So you started the big guns already.
Yeah.
Then what you'll do is they'll ask you some stuff, probably 2 or 3 topics at advanced where they'll ask you to tell a story, like tell you a story in the past, and then maybe ask you to tell a specific instance. What they're going to be looking for is a specific instance where you're talking about one specific thing that happened
Mm.
from start to finish.
Uh-huh.
And the reason they want that forces you to use different tense and aspect markers.
Uh-huh.
So if you say, "Oh, what did you do last summer?" Say, "Oh, we would always go to the beach, and then we would go see we would go to this hot dog stand, and we would do this, we would do this, we would do this, we would do this."
Yeah.
Doesn't give me a lot of evidence of the variations that you can do in a past narration. But if I say, "Can you tell me about the last time?" It was like, "Well, I remember I was walking with my mom when we saw a sunset in a I was walking, saw a sunset." You're like, I'm able to see differences in tense and aspect markers, and that can show me that you have that.
Yes.
So you're basically trying to show off how much you can do. And of
Right.
course, like if you know, like let's say I'm testing OPI for Spanish, for example.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call Spanish my native language, but I can be confused as a native pretty easily with Spanish. But then again, with Spanish, would I be able, like, since I could transfer much of a Spanish to Portuguese, would they see the breakdown point is like, yeah, he's throwing too much Portuguese there.
If you're using another language that is considered breakdown.
Okay.
So if you're using Portuguese when you should be using Spanish, that would be considered breakdown.
Okay. Even like sometimes we're not aware or like
You won't trick them.
Yeah, we're tricked in. Yeah, they'll know. But they'll know. So it's anyway. So you'll do the war up. You'll have level checks.
Mm.
Then they'll probe, go one level above. So they may ask you to um about the electoral college.
Sure.
They might ask you about the
Like world issues.
world issues. What they'll do is they'll try to take something.
yeah.
They before they do that, they'll typically make sure that they'll typically get a couple of past narrations and descriptions. They'll probably get a future narration. What are your plans after you graduate? And, so that you can show because we have to do narration description on all major type frames,
Okay.
as in the future. So I could say, tell me about BYU. What was the process of getting in? That could get me a present description.
Uh-huh.
I could ask you and say, hey, you've lived in. So you're from Virginia. How is Virginia different than Provo? That would give me a comparison contrast, which would be
Right.
the present description.
Normally what they do is they'll ask you what you're interested in, what you do,
Right.
and then they'll say, "Oh, expand on that." It's kind of like what they did to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they'll do is they'll take one of the topics, push it to superior, and then they'll bring it back down to the advanced, and they'll do another topic, and they'll push it to superior. They'll bring it back to advanced, and she'll say, depending on the time, because try to keep it under 30 minutes. They may do
Yeah.
a third topic, but about 3/4 of the way through, they'll do a role play.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the role play. Do the role play, then oftentimes they'll say, okay, thank you. The role play is over. Has that ever happened to you in real life? You get a chance to do another thing, and then they'll do a wind down, and they'll say, Well, it's been lovely visiting with you. What are your plans for the rest of the day? And that's pretty much stop sweating. But what I would say, and I'm going to say this because we are at BYU, which is a religious institution, I would just pray, say a prayer before you begin, that you can be calm. I'd take a minute, do some deep breathing work.
Mhm.
Long, slow inhale, long, slow exhale, and just say, whatever's going to have, I'll have a good visit,
Yeah,
and just go in.
I appreciate that. I'm
And
gonna do that.
and to wrap up, what would you say are the downsides of language testing? What's the part that language testing usually struggles to get?
As the test developer or for the student or what?
For I would say for what is it like? A lot of people criticize language testing. Oh, it doesn't take count this, and that. It doesn't. Language testing sometimes get a lot of criticism.
Yeah.
And what are these criticisms sometimes, and are they valid or not valid in your opinion?
Um, I would say the biggest criticism is that I'd say that the biggest problem is that when a language test doesn't align with what you want people to do in the real world. So you took the TOEFL, yes. How often have you had to have a multiple choice question on your English? Yeah, like on the lecture that you just listened to.
I mean, here when taking tests, always.
No, but like in lecture, did you ever have like that's not a very authentic. It's not a very authentic task. You're taking notes
Yes.
during the lecture during the lecture, right? So I think the biggest complaint comes when there's a misconnect between what the test is actually requiring them to do and the activity that it's actually reflecting. So, for instance, um, the Duolingo test, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
They have like sentence repetition. They have well, how often do you repeat sentences in your language? Almost never, right? How often, they do have, like, a speaking portion, but it's really sort of manufacture
Mm.
like, their writing I'm sorry, their writing portion, it's like write a short sentence or paragraph, but it's not very interactive, and so I think the biggest problem with language tests is when there's a disconnect between what's on the test and what you actually do in real life. We call that indirect testing, where we know that there's a high correlation, but sometimes then it sort of gamifies it, so people are trying to just pass the test as opposed to learn the language.
Right.
So,
And what would
so
be what would be your advice for language learners to get to a decent level in the language?
um, well, you do need to whatever test you have to take, make sure you're familiar with the format of the test. I mean, that's the one thing. The literature is fairly consistent that people that take practice tests will do better on the test than people that don't take practice tests. Just there's the knowing the test format in and of itself.
Yeah.
And a lot of it can actually just sort of be in terms of anxiety instead of wondering what's going to happen.
Sure.
You know what's there.
Yeah.
So I would say my number one thing is to do that. My number two thing, second thing is if you have any choice, choose tests that will actually help you improve your language ability. That way, as you're studying for them, you should have language growth as opposed to just learning how do you game the system and pass the test without
Sure.
learning the language. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was it. Thank you so much.
Good. We appreciate that.
it was nice to visit with you. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
all right.